And he's going to try everything in his power to stop what is going to happen here. Yes or no? Alright, so he tried. In 1831, he tried to stop Jesus from going to the cross. In 1844, hear me, church. In 1844, he tried very hard to stop the message of the judgment from being proclaimed throughout the world. Did you know that? Yes. You wanted? Yes, you knew that. Some of you knew that. Let me give you some of the things that he did. The devil knew the truth about cleansing of the temple will happen on October 22, 1844. He has studied the scripture just as we have. He can quote it, parts. What he does is this. He will quote the parts of the Bible, he twists it, he turns it, and he even lies about it, which is what he did with Eve. He quoted the scripture to Eve. Did God really say? I mean, after all, Eve, how do you know? It was 120 years ago that God spoke to you. You still remember what he said? Huh? That's what he tells us. You go to anywhere, they'll tell you the same thing. How can you really believe this stuff? I mean, after all, this has been through so many translations. This has been written how many years ago? Thousands of years ago. How can you really believe this? Huh? That's his lie. He turns and twists and muddles and lies to pervert the truth. He perverts the truth and markets it as truth. You go to churches today, you go to any other church, the truth is perverted and it is marketed as truth. He creates a spiritual torpor, a spiritual boredom, sleep, spiritual sleep to God's people. So everything is going on just the way it has been for centuries anyway. Where is it? Where is the promise of his coming? So the enemy came up with counterparts. Okay? So here we go. 1844, the second most important event in the sanctuary doctrine took place, October 22. Had this message been preached in 1822 onwards, Ellen White says, rightly so, Jesus would have been here long ago. So, Satan also knew that October 22, 1844 was going to be a very important event in the life of God's people here on this earth. So here's what you do. I'm just going to run through this litany. You don't have to write it down. This is going to be a lot of writing. 1844, Karl Marx and Fred Engels in Paris got together. And they said that we must destroy religion and Christianity because religion and Christianity is the opiate of the masses. That criticism of religion, criticism of Christianity is the basis of all criticism. And the trade unions of the world took this philosophy and ran with it. And it came to be known as Marxism or communism. What is the basis of Marxism and communism? Humanism. Raising the human being above that of God. Leave God out of the picture. Human beings is what is more important. Let us take away God from our picture. That's what Karl Marx and Fred Engels did. Marxism, communism, 1844. The devil can do whatever he can do to stop the message of what is going to happen to God's people. He will thwart it. 1844, Charles Darwin. How many of you know what Charles Darwin did? 1844, October 22. A day that changed the world is October 22, 1844. If you would pick and we talked about this, if you were to pick one day that changed the world, 1844, October 22. Charles Darwin wrote the first thesis of origin of species. Eventually it became evolution. No God is needed. The entire world evolved by itself. And there were great people, the great scientists of the world, swallowed them, die and sink. Huh? They swallowed them. They call themselves the Brights, the Dawkins and the Hawkins of the world. They have swallowed it. And Mr. Dawkins said, God is almost certainly doesn't exist. I mean, come on now. Either he does or he doesn't. Yes. But he says, God almost certainly doesn't exist. How idiotic is that statement? If you know that he doesn't exist, why don't you just say he doesn't exist? But he's not so sure. Why? Because God does exist. No one can deny that. 1844. That's what we're talking about. There was a perversion of biblical truth. John Nelson Darby, how many of you heard, the pastor I'm sure knows about this, brought about this theory of dispensationalism. And 95% of Christianity believes in dispensationalism. 1844. Antinomianism. There was a Jesuit priest by the name of Manuel Japunza who had written this about the scriptures and that the salvation was not based on. We have nothing to do with the commandments of God. Forget about the commandments of God. We are all saved by grace. The law was no longer needed. You see what the devil is doing? He's bringing all kinds of different ideologies and theses at the same time that God is trying to show his people the fulfillment of the sanctuary doctrine. October 22, 1844. October 22, 1844. The Quakers being killed. Quake. There was strange wrappings in New England. The Fox sisters, you've heard about that? The Fox sisters. Some of you are old Adventists have heard about them. The birth of spiritualism. 1844. 1844. Joseph Bates came with the beginnings of Mormonism. Joseph Smith. I'm sorry, thank you. Joseph Bates was Adventist. I have written down Joseph Smith. You're right. By the way, the man that's running for our president is a Mormon. Follower of Joseph Smith. Mormonism. They deny the deity of Jesus Christ. 1844, man by the name of Adu. Islamist, he came and said, we should end all religions and there should be a movement to join all religions together. And wait and see what's going to happen at the very end of time. There will be that movement to join all religions together. 1844, the beginnings of Delta Epsilon Kappa. 1844, the feminist movement. I could go on and on. But let me just say this to you. Whenever God's plan is unveiled, Satan has a plan of his own. Some people search the scriptures. In 1844, they knew that William Miller had made a mistake. They understood there was no temple here on this earth. They knew that the antitypical temple still existed in heaven. They understood the message of the sanctuary doctrine. There was a lady by the name of Rachel Oakes that brought the Sabbath message. They finally decided that God's people at the very end of time, just like God's people from the beginning, had to now embrace the Ten Commandments. They understood the message of the state of the dead. It's all switched. God's people traveling from Egypt to Canaan had a prophet. Moses led them. God's people at the very end of time traveling from spiritual earth to spiritual Canaan will have their own prophet. And do they? Yes. Certainly. You see the type and antitype that I'm trying to say? They understood the sanctuary. We are at the close of the sanctuary. They were at the beginning of the sanctuary doctrine. We are at the end of the sanctuary doctrine. So, deep time, in other words, when we talk about deep time, we're talking about human beings cannot comprehend much more than 100 years. You can't. So anything more than 100 years is deep time for us. They talk about Daniel. I was one of my family members home some time ago, and he was trying to tell me that the book of Daniel was not even written by Daniel. I said, the problem with you is that you read some garbage book somewhere and you have no clue as to what happened. See, first of all, let me say this about Daniel. I traveled through the Middle East about 50 years ago. And about 40 miles outside the ancient capital of the Medes and the Persians, Persepolis, there is a monument, a mosque or mausoleum dedicated to Daniel the Great. Daniel the Great, or Daniel the Prophet of God, there is a mausoleum. And I asked the guy, how long has this mausoleum been here? He said, sir, don't you know about Daniel the Great Prophet of God? I said, when was it built? He said, some 490 years ago. 500 years ago. So now it's about 550 years ago. 50 years before BC, he said. 550 BC it was built. So, the ancient people had recognized that Daniel was God's servant. He was his prophet and built a mausoleum for him. I don't care how many critics can come and say that Daniel didn't write his books, but he did. I have seen to the place where he's buried. His bones are still there. And the guy told me, by the way, they're not Christians over there, they're all Muslims. They don't believe in the Bible. They told me that Daniel was alive. Around 550 BC, he was alive. That's what they told me. There's no reason for the Muslims to be confirming this word. So, the problem with us is that deep time is always a testing time for our faith. Anytime we have to wait for a little bit of time, we get all discouraged. We lose our faith. There were some people that did something while they were waiting.